Aquarius. Have you ever felt something shifting, even when everything on the surface still looks the same? Not a clear event, not something you can easily name, just a subtle feeling, like something is unfolding just beyond what you can see. Old connections, unfinished stories, seem to keep moving in their own quiet way. And somewhere within that, emotions that were once held back don't seem willing to stay still anymore. People often believe that when someone steps away, everything slowly settles, but it doesn't always happen like that. Sometimes it's the moment you step back that everything truly begins to move. Unspoken words, unnamed feelings start finding their way toward each other. And what's interesting is, you don't have to be there, yet somehow, you're still present in the middle of it all. Oh, so what is really happening when you're no longer the one standing in between? There's a certain kind of movement in life, one that only appears when you step back, not walking away in pain, not disappearing so someone can recognize your worth, but a very gentle step back, just enough that you're no longer standing at the center of everything. And somehow, that small distance opens up an entirely different view. What once seemed steady, what once felt balanced because you were there, begins to shift in its own quiet way, like the surface of a lake. When no one stands nearby, that still water you thought you knew begins to reveal soft ripples, spreading outward from places you had never noticed before. You don't have to witness it, and yet, in some way, you can feel it. A subtle misalignment, an energy that no longer flows the same. Something that doesn't quite hold its old shape anymore. Not a clear breaking point, not an immediate conflict, just small changes, enough to uncover what had been hidden all along. And maybe what matters isn't so much what's happening between them, but the simple fact that you're no longer there to hold everything together the way you once did. Some people carry a very particular kind of energy, Aquarius. They don't try to control anything, but their presence alone becomes a quiet point of balance for others. You might have been that person, listening when no one else wanted to listen, staying when things became uncomfortable, holding space so nothing would fall too far apart, even without saying a word. But when you're no longer in that place, what was once held together begins to find its way out. Words that were never spoken. As feelings press down over time, small things that once seemed unimportant begin to meet each other. And sometimes it only takes a very ordinary moment for all of it to stop staying quiet. You may not know exactly what's unfolding, and maybe you don't need to. But there's a good chance you felt this before. That moment when you step away from a space, and afterward, everything begins to shift in ways you didn't expect. Not because you were the cause, but because your absence allowed something that was already there to finally be seen. And maybe that isn't something meant to be fixed. Maybe it's simply a part of the truth slowly coming into view. There are conversations that don't need an opening line. No one speaks first, and yet the atmosphere has already shifted. A glance that lingers just a moment longer. A silence that appears slightly out of place. A simple sentence, suddenly carrying a different weight. Everything continues as it was, but the feeling doesn't. And sometimes it's that subtle shift that becomes the hardest to ignore, because people can stay quiet, but emotions rarely do. They move, they gather, and wait for the right moment to find their way out. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Just something small enough, but precise enough to touch what was already full. An innocent question, a slightly delayed response, a detail that can no longer be overlooked. And then things begin to surface. Not necessarily a big argument, not an explosive moment, but more like a crack, suddenly made visible under the light. Two people who may have once tried to keep everything steady now find themselves facing what they had chosen not to look at too closely. And somewhere in the middle of it all, there's a thread, hard to name, something connected to you, not spoken out loud, and yet undeniably present. Not in a way that makes you the cause, but more like you've become part of a question neither of them has truly answered. Maybe it's the way you once showed up in their lives, maybe it's the way you walked away, or simply the way you made one of them feel something they can't return from. And when emotions reach that point, staying silent becomes harder than ever. Not everyone is ready to say everything. But not everyone can keep pretending that everything is still fine. Aquarius, you may not be there in that exact moment, but somehow your energy is still being felt, like a trace left behind. Like a memory that hasn't fully closed, or like something that makes people pause and quietly wonder, where did this feeling begin? And where is it trying to lead them? And then, as emotions begin to find their way, something becomes clearer, even if no one ever says it out loud. You're still there, not in a physical sense, not as a name spoken in the middle of a conversation, but as a kind of presence that's hard to explain, like the echo that lingers after a song has already ended. People may try to talk about other things, they may shift the subject, avoid the deeper layer, or convince themselves it was all just a misunderstanding. But there are traces. That logic alone can't erase. And you might be one of those traces. Not because you did anything grand, but sometimes it's the simplest things that stay the longest. In the way you truly listened, without interrupting, without judging, just being there long enough for someone to feel understood. The way you chose to leave, without creating noise, without harsh words, but clear enough for someone to realize some things can't return to what they once were, or even the choices you didn't make, the things you kept to yourself, the moments you held back, the feelings you didn't try to explain. All of it, in its own quiet way, left an imprint. And what's interesting is, that imprint doesn't disappear when you walk away. It stays, not loudly, not asking for attention, but present enough to slip into the spaces between two people trying to understand what's happening to them. They may not say your name. They may not mention you directly. But in the way they pause mid-sentence, in the way they hold each other's gaze just a little longer, in the things they can't quite explain, you're still there. Like an unfinished question, like a feeling not fully understood, like a missing piece that quietly changes the entire picture. And maybe this isn't meant to make you feel more important. Maybe it's just a gentle reminder that the way you show up in someone's life always leaves something behind, whether you realize it or not. Aquarius, you don't need to try to be the center of anyone's story, but sometimes it's your honesty, your difference, and the way you choose to live true to yourself that makes you a presence people don't easily forget. And as things begin to come into clearer view, as emotions can no longer stay hidden, maybe what they're facing isn't just their own story anymore. Maybe it's also the way you once stepped into their life and quietly shifted something they never quite found the words to name. And as those traces remain, something else begins to come into clearer view. The way you chose to leave. Aquarius. You're not the kind of person who needs a perfect ending. You don't try to explain everything all the way to the end, and you don't feel the need to make others understand right away. You simply stop. Softer than people expect, yet more final than they're ready to accept. Not because you stopped feeling, but because you realized some things can't continue the way they used to. And instead of stretching it out, you step back. From the outside, it may look like silence, but on the inside, it's a very clear decision. It's just that not everyone knows how to read it. People are used to long explanations, used to everything being spoken out loud, used to endings that can be clearly defined. But you chose something different. You let things close in stillness. And somehow, that's what makes people start to wonder. Not right away, but later. When they begin to realize you're not coming back the way you used to, they start revisiting the small details. A moment when you stayed quiet a little longer. A time when you didn't react the same way. Something shifted, but they didn't notice it in time. And then the questions begin to surface. Not to blame you, but more like a quiet, late attempt to understand what really happened. What made you stop? What did they miss? Was there a part of you they never truly reached? Those questions, they're not easy to answer. Because your silence was never a mystery meant to be solved. It was simply the result of everything you had felt, everything you had thought, and finally, accepted. Aquarius, you didn't walk away to make anyone chase you. You simply stopped standing in a place that no longer felt like yours. And what's interesting is, that very departure, without noise, without explanation, leaves behind more questions than words ever could. And sometimes those questions don't stay with just one person. They spread, touching multiple lives at the same time, as if your change quietly created a space where each person has to face their own feelings. And in that space, not everyone will understand you. But maybe that was never something you truly needed anyway. And then, after all the silence, the unanswered questions, and the emotions that can no longer be avoided, people begin to move, not with a clear plan, not as a carefully thought out decision, but more like a quiet instinct. They find their way back to the place that once felt the most meaningful, a place where things once made sense, a place where they understood their own feelings, a place where they felt seen, heard, able to be themselves, without trying so hard. And sometimes, that place carries your presence. Not because you called them back. You may not have done anything at all. But somewhere beneath the surface, in the middle of everything they've just gone through, there's a part of them that wants to return to where things once felt clear. Not to relive the past, but maybe to understand what has changed. And as they move closer, nothing feels quite the same anymore. Not because they've completely changed, but because you are no longer standing where you once were. Aquarius, you've been through something of your own. Maybe no one saw each step you took. Maybe no one fully understands what you had to think through. But, something within you has shifted. You don't react the same way. You don't wait for what used to feel familiar. You don't place yourself in the spaces you once accepted. You see things a little slower now, a little deeper, and more honestly than before. So when someone moves closer to you now, the story isn't just about them anymore. It's about you, about how you feel, what you've learned, and what you no longer wish to repeat. They may carry questions. They may carry feelings they haven't fully named. They may think they're searching for you. But in truth, they're searching for their own answers. And you don't have to be that answer. Because this time, what matters isn't who is walking toward you. What matters is whether you still want to open that door. Not out of habit. Not because old emotions return. Not because you're afraid of missing something. But if you do open it, it comes from clarity. A choice that isn't rushed, not pulled by the past, but guided by who you are now. And maybe the most beautiful part of all of this isn't that someone comes back. It's that you realize you have the right to choose how the story continues. And then, after all those movements, a stillness appears. Not an empty kind of silence, but a very personal space, where everything seems to slow down, just enough for you to see more clearly what's happening within you. No one is pushing you. Nothing needs to be decided right away. It's simply a real moment, where you realize you don't have to react as quickly as you used to. You can pause to observe, not to judge, pause to feel, without needing to understand everything all at once. And more importantly, pause to listen to yourself. Slowly, like you're sitting with an old friend you haven't truly spent time with in a long while. Because some questions in life don't come for immediate answers. They come to help you notice where you are, what just unfolded around you, the people moving closer, the emotions returning. All of it may simply be a quiet way life reaches out and asks, what do you truly want in the version of yourself you are today? Not who you used to be, not the version of you that accepted what once felt familiar, but you, right now. Maybe the answer is still unclear. Maybe you're still in the middle of that process, and that is completely okay. Not every story needs a clear ending. Not every choice has to be made right away. Some things, when felt long enough, begin to reveal themselves in their own time. Aquarius. What matters here may not be who is coming back, or what happened between them. What matters is this: you've changed. You're no longer standing in the same emotional place. You're no longer seeing things through the same lens, and that alone, no matter how small it seems, is enough to change the way you choose. If you open the door, it can come from peace. If you don't, that too can come from peace. There's no absolute right or wrong here, only honesty with yourself. And if, in some quiet moment, that this story resonates with you, Not because it's entirely true, but because something in you feels familiar. Then maybe you'll want to stay here just a little longer. No need to say anything right away. Just be here, listen, or leave behind a thought, something you've never quite said before. And if you return another day, when things within you feel a little clearer, this space will still be here, unchanged, unrushed, just a small place where you can pause and realize sometimes we're not really searching for answers. We're simply learning how to be at ease with ourselves, within the silence.